Happy almost St. Patrick's Day and welcome to the Emerald Isles Quilt. I'm Brita, the questioning quilter, and today's video is special because, well, I had a great deal of trouble figuring out what fabrics I wanted to use on this quilt and ended up making way too many samples. As a result, this video, in addition to showing you how to make this quilt, is going to have a little mini lesson in value and contrast. And speaking of how to make the quilt, it starts with this super simple pinwheel block. We are going to start with 5-inch squares of green and white fabric to make the half square triangles, which we will trim to 4 3/8 by 4 3/8. You will need 4 of these to make a pinwheel, which goes counterclockwise. The direction is important. In order to keep them all going the same direction, I recommend sewing in rows, light on the left and dark on the right. Rotate these and sew the 2 rows together to get a pinwheel that should measure 8 1/4 by 8 1/4. Make 4 cuts, each 1 3/8 inches from the center seam. You're going to do vertically, horizontal, turn it, do vertically and horizontal again. You will end up with 9 sub blocks, which we're now going to rearrange. Leave these 2 corners alone. We're going to take the compass points, north, south, east, and west, and we are going to turn them so that the dark is oriented towards the center. Now the last 2 blocks, we are going to turn so that the dark is to the outside. This makes a 4-leaf clover block, and thanks to Jane and Marlene for suggesting that name. Now once all the blocks are made, putting them together into the quilt of any size you want is so easy. We're just going to alternate which direction they're tipped. So this one is tipped, angle to the right. The next one to the left, you'd continue right, left, right, left. The next row, we're going to start tip to the left. So it'd be left, right, right. And notice this, when you have 4 of them together, look at this beautiful little island in the middle surrounded by the 4-leaf clovers, hence the name Emerald Isles. And shout out to David Hensley for coming up with that name. And when they're all together, it looks like this. Now, I mentioned that I had trouble figuring out what fabrics to use, and hundreds of you responded to my posts in the community section and told me your preference. And this was the winner with 42% of the vote. But that means that 58% of you liked a different fabric combination. Now don't worry, I'm going to show you how to make all of them. Here's the same quilt made with some bright red fabric that I had. Now, I consider this red and green quilt to be high contrast quilts. So just a quick review. Value is how light or dark a fabric is, with pure white being 10 and black being 0. Contrast is the difference in value between the 2 fabrics. So if we were to compare the pale blue with kind of a medium dark blue, the contrast would be 5. These 2 quilts would be, I don't know, something like an 8. Now, if we used a more medium color, say this medium green, for example, we would have a quilt that might have a contrast of, say, 5. If we used this even softer orange, we might have a contrast of 4. It's not a rocket science. It's not precise. It's more so that you can compare more contrast, less contrast. And speaking of comparing, here's 4 of them all together. Now notice the 2 on the top that have higher contrast are brighter and bolder. The 2 on the bottom with lower contrast are softer and more muted. So depending on which one you like, you can choose which color, which value of color that you want to use. Now, these are all simple 2-color quilts, but what if we wanted 3 colors? Well, we can mix and match these blocks and put them together however we like. So let's say that we wanted to try a red and green quilt. So we start with the greens all pointed to the right, and if we make all the reds pointed to the left, we can set it like this. Now the next row, we're going to start the red pointing to the left, the green pointing to the right. And we get this awesome motif, and when it's all sewn together into a quilt, it looks like this. Now, we have 4 different fabrics. I'm going to show you 4 different combinations. Here is the dark green with the orange. Notice how the 2 blocks have different contrasts, so they stand out against each other. Now, if we do the red with the medium green, It's interesting because the two colors are very different, but they're actually pretty close to the same value. And finally, we have the orange and medium green. And while they're close, they're just a little bit off in contrast. Now, let's look at all four of them together. Pick out which one you like the best, and let's see if contrast had any play in your choice. Here's that same set of blocks in black and white. So, did you like the top ones that were closer in value, or the bottom ones where there was more contrast? But wait, there's more. What if we put 3 fabrics into one block? So you can see we have 2 green triangles and 2 red triangles. And when they're cut up and turned into a block, they look like this. Now, notice we have half red and half green, and we're going to arrange this really easily. We're going to turn these so this green triangle is to the center, and it makes this really pretty green island. Now, I hear you thinking, what about these red corners? Well, look what happens when it gets turned into a quilt. We have all these adorable red islands and green islands. And of course, we can do this with all the other fabric combinations. If we substitute the orange fabric for the red, it makes the green islands really pop because of the contrast. For the same reason, if we mix the red with the medium green, the red islands pop. And if we mix the medium green with the orange, well, they're both medium, so there's not going to be as much contrast, and so the quilt is calmer and softer. Now, here's all 4 so that you can decide which one you like the best. Whenever I put out a video where I use white as the background in the quilt, and most of them do, I always get a couple of viewers telling me that they don't like using white in their quilts, and could I please use a different fabric? So that's what I had originally planned to do when I conceived this quilt. So notice I've replaced half of the white blocks with this peach color and the other half with this light green color. Now just be aware that because the peach and the light green are a lower value than white, the contrast on this, instead of being an 8, is more like a 5 or a 6. Now it's an easy pinwheel, but the construction isn't instantly obvious, so let me show you. Each of these half square triangles is different. The first will be dark and light green, then a dark green and peach. Then red is paired with the light green, and finally the red with the peach background. These are arranged into a counterclockwise pinwheel. Now notice that the bottom row uses peach as the background, and the top row has the light green. The right column uses red, and the left column is made up of dark green. Remember, this is counterclockwise. These are then cut up into subblocks, rearranged, and sewn together just like we did before. Once the blocks are made, this is constructed exactly the same way as we did before. We just line up these green triangles to the center, and then when it's all sewn together, it looks like this. Now notice that instead of red and green islands, we have red and green diamonds. And of course, we can do the other colors. If we use the dark green and orange, we end up with this quilt. And one of my viewers from Malaysia said that it reminded her of their traditional floor tiles. Now, the red with medium green looks like this, and I love how the difference in contrast causes those red diamonds to pop out just a little bit. I wanted to show you this because this video is actually backwards. This is actually the very first block that I made when I first conceived of this design. I love how the medium green and the light green go together, the orange and the peach coordinate. When you put 4 of them together, it looks like this. It's lower contrast, but it's soft and it's soothing, and I just love it. And here it is, made into the full-size quilt. And as we get further and further out, this starts to look a little too muted, a little too soft, if you will. Here's all 4 of them together. Now, I still love this one the best, but unless you live in a bowling alley, you're never going to be far enough away from a quilt for it to look this small. But on the computer, it looks too soft, almost muddy. So this is why I'm probably going to stick with white as a background, because I can spend all of this effort on a quilt and have it something that won't look good on the computer. Now, I have another whole video worth of quilt designs using this negative version of the block. So let me know, would you like to see that next month? Or if you had enough 4-leaf clovers for a little while and I should put this off for a little while, maybe till next March. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Stay well and happy quilting.